Brilliant. Well, it's so good to be here. I don't know about all of you, but I have had an amazing week. This has been just such a great week for me to be able to get settled in here, to be able to get to know the staff a bit more, and to be able to just get excited about what God is doing and what God is going to be continuing to do here at New Vine. I'm so grateful to be able to be here, and I'm keen for what God's going to do. So I'll get into the message now. So what I want to do to start with is I'd like to ask all of you just to think about a time when you felt like the odd one out. Has there been a time in your life where you felt like the odd one out? You felt different from everyone else in the group, everyone else that you were kind of hanging out with. Perhaps for you, you found yourself surrounded by a bunch of people who are really sporty and you're just not as into sport. I could probably say yes to that. Perhaps you found yourself with a group of friends and they all have these shared memories, this shared history that you weren't a part of. And as you're hanging out, as you're spending time together, you kind of feel like the odd one out. You feel different from other people. I think all of us at various points in our lives, we feel different. We feel like the odd one out. And that's certainly been true of me. Like growing up, I was definitely like the odd kid, the weird kid. I remember there was a time when I was playing soccer, or supposed to be playing soccer, and everyone is at the other end of the field, actually playing the game, and I was up the other end, head in the clouds, lost in my own little world and whatnot. So I often felt as a kid like I was a bit weird, I was a bit different. I felt like the odd one out. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I feel like I'm different from others around me, the temptation is to kind of become just like them. The temptation for me is to kind of smooth over those differences and just become a copy of the people that I'm hanging out with. So it's like, oh, you're really into sport? Yeah, me too. I love sports. I love the one with the ball. Yeah. Actually, a thing that I've said. So that for me, like that's that tendency is to try to smooth over the differences, because I think we long to belong. I think we all long to feel a part of something, to feel a part of the group. And so often in our world, the way that we find belonging is by becoming just like the people that we're around. And however, if you're a Christian, if you've said yes to Jesus, then you're called to be part of the church. And something that is both beautiful about the church and something that is also really challenging is that church is filled with people who are all different from one another in all different kinds of ways. We're all different. We've got different personalities and perspectives, and there's people who are going to have different backgrounds to you, different genders and ages and life stages. And this is a beautiful thing, but it's also a challenging thing, because being part of the church means that all these people, all their differences are called to be, as we're going to read about this morning, we're all called to be one body. And so that's a challenge, I think. That's something that is not always easy. And what I hope that you can get out of my message this morning is I hope that you can get an excitement and a wonder and an awe of what it might look like to have a community of people who are all different, who are diverse and various in all the different ways of being human, and yet we're able to be one. And despite our differences, we're able to be unified. I hope that you can have a bit of the excitement that I have about what church could be. But I also want to recognize something, and I want to honor the fact that for many, many people in our world, and perhaps some of you here today, the church is a loaded word. For many people, church is a word that brings up some hurt, some pain. For many people, your experience of church has been that people are behaving in ways that are not like Jesus. And sometimes it's really hard for people who've had those experiences to come along to church. And I do want to recognize that. And what I hope you don't hear me say this morning is I hope you don't hear me say that what I'm saying is this is what church is always like, or this is what church is guaranteed to be like, because I recognize it's not always going to be like this. Sometimes people fall way short of the standard of Jesus. But what I do want you to hear me say this morning is this is what we should be. This is the call upon our lives. This is the challenge that if you've said yes to Jesus, this is one of those things that you've said yes to as well, is being part of a whole bunch of people who are all different and yet all unified and are all called to love one another. So that's what I hope that you're able to hear as we kind of talk about this morning. We're going to be looking at a passage in the Bible from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So if you have your Bibles here, could I encourage you to open them up there? 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 12 in just a moment. But before we do, I just want to set the scene a little bit of what we're going to be reading about, because this is one passage in one chapter, in one letter in the Bible. So we need to kind of get our bearings, set the scene of where we are. And one thing that I really want to highlight is that throughout this letter, this is a letter that was written by a guy named Paul to the Christians who were living in Corinth in the first century. And a theme that comes up again and again and again throughout this letter is the need for unity. This is a church which, for many different reasons, is at risk of dividing. They're at risk of disconnecting from one another. This is a church where they're dividing over a bunch of different things. Some are dividing over the preachers that they really like. You know, some people are like, oh, I'm with Paul, or I'm with Apollos, or I'm with Cephas. So they're kind of, following after the leaders that they're really into. Unfortunately, something that we still see churches doing today. They're dividing over knowledge as well. Some people are saying, they have this kind of special knowledge or special wisdom that others don't have, and that affects the different practices that they do. And Paul says to them, knowledge is good. Knowledge, though, puffs up, whereas love builds up. And so we need to pursue love. And so there's all these different things, and Paul keeps reminding them again and again and again to pursue love and to pursue unity. And the same thing is true in our passages here today, is that in our passages today, we are going to be exploring this idea of differences. There's lots of different people with different gifts, but they all get those gifts from the one Spirit. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, it says that some people have been given the gift of healing or prophecy or wisdom or teaching or discerning spirits, all these different gifts. To one has received this gift and to another a different gift, but they all come from the one Spirit. So the thing that I want us to have in our mind as we enter into this passage is this idea of both differences, both diversity as well as unity. And the unity doesn't come from us being just like one another. The unity comes from the Spirit. God's Spirit is what brings us together. God's Spirit is what unifies us. So I encourage you to have that in mind as we go through this. So if we could just have the slide before that. Sorry, I forgot to grab the clicker. So these are the three things that I'd like to be talking about this morning. I want to draw out these three things from our passage. We're going to be reading 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 to 26. And I want to ask the question, what does it mean for us to be the body? And I think that being the body means, as I've already talked about, it means being diverse. It means you are you and I am me, and we are not always going to be exactly like one another, but we are able to be unified. Thanks so much, Georgie. So I want to talk about being diverse. But the thing is that when we are diverse, when we are different from one another, when there are genuine differences between one another and those are celebrated, there is a thing that sneaks in, and that is comparison. Comparison sneaks in, and I've kind of used strong language here of killing comparison, but I think it's really important. And I'm talking specifically about that unhealthy kind of comparison. But I think it's like a disease to the body when we compare one another. But I'll unpack what I mean by comparison when we get to that. And then thirdly, I want to talk about choosing harmony over hierarchy. And I'm not talking about a hierarchy in terms of leadership, but a hierarchy of importance. There's no one gift or one person that is more important than another when it comes to the body. So we're going to talk about all of those things just as a little teaser for what's to come up. But let's dive into our passage now. So we're going to start by reading in verse 12. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12. And it says this: just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. And we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. So Paul is talking about the importance here of remembering that our bodies are not made up of one part. You know, it would be a bit bizarre if that was the case. Our bodies have many parts, and in the same way, the church has many different kinds of people. And he mentions some of them here. He talks about Jews and Gentiles. Gentiles are those people from the nations outside of Israel. So he talks about Jews and Gentiles. He also talks about slaves and free people. So what I want to do is I want us to imagine what might it have been like for someone in the first century, someone who is a part of that Roman world of the first century. What might it have been like for them to encounter a church gathering? And I think something important to remember is that the common cultural belief of the day was that the gods have ordered the society in the way that brings about harmony. The gods have placed people where they need to be, so that people are in authority because the gods have placed them there, and slaves are slaves because the gods have placed them there. There were these separations because this is the way the gods have structured the world. And yet, there was a regular practice when Christians would gather together in the first century. They would have a meal together, and at the one table, there would be Jews and Gentiles. There'd be slaves and free people. There would be male and female. This would have been scandalous to someone in the Roman world at that time, because to eat at the same table is to say that we are equal with one another. And it would have been seen as a disruption to the Roman order, to the way that the world was established. And it's something of this scandal in the eyes of the people outside that Paul is referencing here, that both Jews and Gentiles, slave and free, are one. They're unified. They're considered to be a part of the one body. And I think it seems beautiful from our perspective, but it's so important to remember what the first readers would have heard, because I think us too, we can at times feel surprised by the kinds of people who might come along and want to be part of the church. And I think it's so important for us to remember the challenge that Paul is presenting here, that those groups that usually are apart can be brought one in Christ. That's so beautiful. It's such a good news. but it means that the body is diverse. It's not just one part. The body is many parts. And I think that unity requires diversity because unity without diversity is uniformity. Unity without diversity is uniformity. We're not called to be one form. We're not called to be just cookie cutter copies of Christians. We're called to be different. We're called to be different from one another. So that means that being the body means being one with those who are different from us. Those who have different opinions, different backgrounds, different political preferences, different personalities. It means, sorry to say, but it means being one with people who annoy you, people who frustrate you. I mean, maybe I'm the only one in the room, but sometimes if people are different from me, I can be like, oh, why would you think that? Why would you have that opinion? Being the body means forgiving and being forgiven. Being the body means reconciling and being reconciled. It means that you and I might find ourselves in deep relationship with those who we would otherwise completely avoid. It's hard, right? It's challenging. That kind of unity, it's a big call, it's a big challenge. And so I want to ask the question, what does it take? What does it take for us to achieve this kind of unity? What does it take for us to have this unity in midst of such diversity? Does it require us trying really hard and mustering it up in our own strength to just do it? Well, I think it will take a lot of effort, but what I find fascinating is that's not what Paul says. Paul doesn't say in the passage that you are going to achieve this unity of one body by working really hard at it. He actually says that it's the one Spirit that brings the unity. It's not because of anything that we have done that makes us one. Rather, we are one body because we were all baptized by one Spirit. And we are one body because we are all given one Spirit to drink. It is this one Spirit that brings the unity amidst the diversity. It is the one Spirit that creates the unity of the body. And our job, our role, is to yield to the Spirit, to lay down our will and our desires and the way that we would have it and say yes to the Spirit of God. And that, I think, is the hard work, is to say, not my will, but your will be done. But it's good. It's worth it. Absolutely. All right, so that's being diverse. I want to move on now to the next part of our passage, starting now in verse 15. And it says this: "Now, if the foot should say, 'Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, 'Because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? And if the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body." So we kind of began by exploring how being the body means that there are these many parts, that we're different from one another, and we need that diversity, and we also need unity. But wherever there is diversity, wherever there are different people, and the differences, the genuine differences are celebrated and honored, there is this temptation that we would compare ourselves to one another. And comparison is sneaky. It creeps in ways that we might not expect. But the thing about comparison is that someone always loses. Either you lose because I say that I'm better than you, or I lose because I say that you're better than me. Either way, someone loses. And again, I'm talking about this kind of negative way of comparing ourselves. So I'm sure that there are ways of doing it healthily, but more often than not, I think that this way of comparing sneaks in. And it is sneaky. I think I see it coming into my encouragements. I think especially in Christian circles, comparison can sneak into the way that we encourage one another. So if I was to give you a fairly kind of meaningless example here, I'll pick on Isaac. If I wanted to encourage Isaac, and this is completely hypothetical, I don't know how good you are at making popcorn, but let's say I wanted to encourage Isaac's popcorn making. I could say, wow, Isaac, you're so good at making popcorn. I mean, whenever I make popcorn, it's just terrible. But when you make popcorn, it's so good. Everyone loves it. I've heard so many people say how good your popcorn is, whereas me, no one said a word. People complain when I make popcorn and it's burnt and half of it's not even popped. It's terrible. But you are so good at making popcorn. It's awesome. Hope you feel encouraged. I'm exaggerating, but I do think that this is how we sometimes encourage. Sometimes when we encourage other people, we talk more about ourselves than we talk about others. And technically, I was building Isaac up in that encouragement, but I did it by tearing myself down. How silly is this? But this is what comparison does. This is how comparison sneaks into Christian encouragement. And I do think that comparison is so deadly to the body. Because think about our passage. When we compare, it causes us to say things that aren't even true. It causes us to deny reality. I mean, since the foot is not the hand and since the ear is not the eye, they make the ridiculous statement, the delusional statement of saying that they don't belong to the body. What a silly thing to say. Of course they are part of the body. They're not a part of the body because there are other parts that they think are more important. This is why I want to kind of use that strong language of killing comparison, because I think that comparison is like a deadly disease to the body, and it needs to be killed. It needs to be removed from the body in order for the body to survive. So my hope is that everyone here, whether you've been a part of this church community since it began, or if you're like me, you're new and still getting settled in, I hope that everyone here is able to feel like they belong, whoever you are, and whatever your gifts, whatever your part of the body is. I hope that you feel that sense of belonging. And notice as well in our passage that we don't belong to the body because we've earned our place there. It's not like it says, oh, well, because you're a particularly amazing part of the body, you belong to the body. No, our belonging doesn't come from that. It doesn't come from ourselves at all. The passage says that God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. So just as the one Spirit from our last passage brings the unity amidst diversity, so too here in this passage do you belong to the body because God is what gives you, who is the one who gives you that belonging. You belong to the body not because of you, but because of God. And that's good news. All right, final one. How are we going? Excellent. All right, so we're going to start now in verse 21. So verse 21 says this: "The eye cannot say to the hands, 'I don't need you,' and the head cannot say to the feet, 'I don't need you.' On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts of the body that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in body, but that its parts should have equal concern for one another. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So now Paul is going on to talk about how there is no, as I would put it in my own words, that there is no hierarchy. We should choose harmony over hierarchy. And again, I'm not talking about a hierarchy in terms of leadership, but I'm more talking about a hierarchy of importance. That no one part, no one person is more important than another. Rather, that each part is of equal importance. It's so important for you and I to remember that we are limited. We are limited human beings. We actually need one another in order to be part of the body. And so it's so important for us to remember that. We need the gifts and the talents and the perspectives and the wisdom of other people. I think for some people, the temptation is self-sufficiency. You can kind of hear it sometimes in kids. I can do it myself. But I don't think that we grow out of that as adults. I think sometimes we can find ourselves saying that as well. I can do this myself. The reality is, though, that we need one another. We need other people to help us. But I think for other people, the temptation is the opposite. Rather than being self-sufficient, some people forget themselves and they think that other people, they need other people, but they don't have anything to offer. Some people forget the fact that that teacher, that partner, that friend, that person isn't the answer to all the world's problems. Maybe you carry something that they need. Maybe you have wisdom or talents or perspectives that they need to draw on as well. And so I could put it like this. For some people, it's self-sufficiency, and for others, it's self-forgetfulness. The problem with both is that it's self-centeredness. Whereas being the body means being others-focused. It means we're not focused on ourselves, we're actually focused on other people. It means celebrating and honoring and recognizing other people and their gifts, especially those who are less visible. See, the church is supposed to be different from the world around us, which so often honors those who are already honored. We're supposed to be countercultural, where we give greater honor to those who are less visible, for those who neglect that honor, who are neglected by others. And the same thing is true of our bodies. I mean, if you think about it, Paul's making a really good point. He's saying that you can see our faces, but you can't see our kidneys. But take those kidneys away, and what's your face going to look like? Not very good. So in the same way, we need to honor and care deeply for those people in our church who seem to be neglected, those people who may be on the outskirts, who may be unseen. It's so important for us to do that. Church is called to be a community of people where if you are suffering, we are suffering. If you are celebrating, we are celebrating. If you are a part of the church, if you are a part of the body, then the good news is you are not alone. We're in this together. And I think that's the beautiful thing about being the body. So I'd like to invite the worship team back up now. And I would like to create a space for all of you here to be able to listen to God for a moment. I want to give us a moment of silence just for us to hear the voice of God. And if this is something that you're not used to doing, I invite you to just trust that God is able to speak. And I want you to ask God, what is something that He wants to highlight from this message, and what should you do about it? What is something that God wants to highlight from this message, and what should you do about it? And just notice what comes to your mind as you ask that. And there's no pressure. I'm not going to put you on the spot later on and ask you to tell me, but I want to create a space for you to talk to God. So let's take a moment. If it's helpful for you, I encourage you to close your eyes so that you can focus in on what God's going to say. And I just want a moment of silence, and then we'll move on to what's next. Father, I want to thank you that you desire unity, that you long for all of us here to belong, to feel like we're a part of something. And I thank you as well that you desire diversity, that you made everyone not to just be cookie cutter copies of one another, but for us all to be our own selves, all to be different in different ways. I just pray that you would help us recognize this is not something that comes about because we've tried really hard or because we're particularly amazing at doing this in our own strength, but this actually comes about because of you, because you are able to bring unity in the midst of diversity. So may we be a company of people who lay down our will and say yes to you, God. Yes to your unity. Yes to your diversity. May you help us to do this, I pray. Amen. Okay, so now we're going to move into a time of communion. We're going to take a moment now, and I think this is such a beautiful thing to do in response to this message, because Jesus prayed, as he was going to the cross, he prayed to the Father that you and I, that the church, we would be one, just as he and the Father are one. He prayed for unity. He went to the cross for unity. And so as we take communion, what we're doing is we are remembering and recognizing the fact that Jesus died for us. He died for our sins. He died so that we may be one. And like I've been saying, we need Jesus. We need God to be the one bringing about this unity. So I invite you in this time, when you're ready, to take communion. There's some tables at the front here. There's also some tables at the back. Whenever you're ready, take communion, take the cup and the bread, and go back to your seats and take communion. You can either pray together or you can just do it individually. There's no pressure. There's also no pressure if you, perhaps you're just exploring faith and perhaps you're not sure about this Jesus thing. Don't feel any pressure to do this either if that's not something that you're comfortable with doing at the moment. But in your own time, during this first song, I encourage you all to take communion, and then we're going to head into some more time of worship. But thanks so much for listening.